of coronavirus. So just breaking news coming into us within the past few seconds. The Prime Minister has been under the care of doctors in a hospital in London, and he is being now admitted into intensive care with those persistent symptoms of coronavirus. He has been in hospital since Sunday evening. We were expecting him to stay in the hospital for a second night in this hospital, St Thomas's Hospital. But we heard earlier on from his tweet that he was doing well, and we heard also from Dominic Raab earlier on that he was still very much in charge of what was happening. Now, Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor, joins me live on the line now. Laura, a very worrying development now about the British Prime Minister.
Hello, Kasia. Yes, just in the last few minutes, we've had an official statement from Downing Street after very, very little information through the day. That at around 7 o'clock tonight, as I understand it, the Prime Minister was taken to intensive care. The statement makes clear that he, is receiving excellent care, and he wants to thank all the people at the NHS. But something important has changed in that he's now in intensive care rather than being looked after by medics, and he's felt it necessary to ask the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab to deputise for him where needs be. Now, that's a completely different message to what we've heard in the last sort of 18 hours or so, where it was continually the Prime Minister's in touch, he's still in charge, everything is sort of almost as business as usual. Clearly now the Prime Minister being in intensive care changes everything. His condition, as I understand it, worsened over the course of this afternoon. He's still conscious, we're told, but he's been moved to intensive care as a precaution in case he requires ventilation as necessary to get through this illness.
Really difficult news to hear, Laura. We heard your question actually earlier on during that daily press briefing, and you asked whether if the Prime Minister, if he was not well enough to come out of hospital, was he well enough to govern the country? As you were saying, the government very much saying that he was in charge. Of course, that is absolutely, it cannot be sustainable with this latest development. Well,
that's right. And as I say, with those sort of very sporadic small bits of information that we've had through the day, it seems somewhat of a vacuum, to be honest. And talking to people in government who would normally be quite forthcoming about what was going on was a very, very rigid script, just that he was in good spirits and he was working was sort of cracking on as best he could be, and he was said to be in good spirits. That changed very dramatically in the last 10 minutes. But also there was something slightly more puzzling, whereas at the press conference earlier this afternoon, the Foreign Secretary said he hadn't spoken to the Prime Minister since Saturday. Now, that seemed strange, that seemed rather odd, given that Dominic Raab was meant to be taking charge of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is continually in touch. Clearly, at that point, the situation was already getting worse. As we then latterly discovered just after 8 o'clock, the Prime Minister has in fact been moved to intensive care.
Now, we know that from a spokesperson from Number 10 that the Prime Minister is receiving excellent care, and they want to pass on their thanks to all the NHS staff for their hard work and their dedication. And as you were saying, he's been in St Thomas's Hospital in London since Sunday evening. Of course, it's a very difficult situation given the seriousness of coronavirus itself. But in terms of the detail of his condition, we just simply don't know.
We don't know, and we were told last night, about 24 hours ago, that he was just having routine tests now. But we've struggled to get Downing Street to tell us through the day what those tests were for. And we know that, it's been more than 10 days, 11 days that he's had persistent symptoms of coronavirus and high temperature and a persistent cough. All we know at the moment is that his condition worsened over the course of this afternoon. Therefore, this decision has been made as a precaution to him being in intensive care tonight. So clearly, it's a very serious situation for the Prime Minister. Downing Street emphasising that this still is a precaution. But it's obviously a huge moment. I mean, when he was taken to hospital last night, that was obviously a real milestone in the way this whole crisis has unfolded. And, so many people who weren't right in the heart of government have been hit by this. But to have the Prime Minister in intensive care at a time when the country is trying to respond to an emergency, the government is trying to get through an emergency for the nation's health and the economy, it really is a worrying development, and I think something that will come as a surprise. I was talking to the cabinet ministers about this morning, and a couple of them sounded quite relaxed. One said, I'm glad he's gone to go and have a proper rest. He's been a bit like an alpha male and refused to stop working. But this obviously is a very different situation now.
Extremely different situation, Laura. We see, and you talk about him continuously working. Just 6 hours ago, I'm just on his Twitter feed, he was tweeting about the advice last night. On the advice of my doctor, Boris Johnson tweeted, I went into hospital for some routine tests. I'm still experiencing coronavirus symptoms. I'm in good spirits and keeping in touch with my team as we work together to fight this virus and keep everyone safe. So only 6 hours ago was he very much keeping everybody up to date, as he has been over the few days when we initially heard about his symptoms with those little video messages that we're watching now from a couple of days ago. So very difficult now to understand that he is now in intensive care. For anybody just joining us, just to restate that Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, has been admitted into intensive care. A spokesperson for Number 10 saying that he is receiving excellent care and passing on thanks to all the NHS staff for their hard work and their dedication. But Laura, this for the United Kingdom, we heard the Queen making a statement to the nation just yesterday. This is a devastating blow.
It's certainly a very sad turn in all of this, of course, and rather an unexpected one. And we will just have to see in the coming days. I mean, Downing Street is firm tonight. This has happened as a precaution. It doesn't, mean more than necessarily than they've said that they've moved him in order that if he requires ventilation as his condition progresses, he's in the right place to do that. But it obviously is a very serious moment. And we don't know what comes next, other than the Prime Minister has asked Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, actually to deputise for him, giving up any sort of pretense that he's somehow able to mind the shop when he's battling this illness.
And we heard Dominic Raab take on this daily press statement that we're seeing every day now since lockdown. We're seeing these daily press conferences. Dominic Raab gave his today. I know you posed the first question in this daily press conference. He wants to show that the Prime Minister was very much in control. That situation will inevitably change. But Dominic Raab now, the man at the helm of the British government.
Indeed, and for the time being, Dominic Raab, who has the official title, not just as Foreign Secretary, but as First Secretary of State now in the UK, that means someone basically is a sort of de facto deputy. They're like the official understudy. For him, obviously, this is also a huge moment. He already this morning chaired the government's coronavirus daily sort of emergency meeting that they've been holding every morning at 9:15. But at that point, it really didn't seem as if he would actually be taking on some of the roles. Now, there was some chatter this afternoon amongst Tory MPs that I was talking to who were unhappy that the Prime Minister wasn't stepping back further in order to actually to get better. Now, of course, that choice has actually been taken out of his hands.
So when it comes to the way that, because it's important to stress that we don't have a deputy prime minister in this country, as you were outlining the role of Dominic Raab, but Boris Johnson didn't choose a deputy. So that, I guess, it shows how in control he was and wanted to be seen to be. But in a situation like this, it complicates what is already a terribly complicated situation.
Yes, although in the UK it doesn't always work. There isn't, sort of strictly speaking, there isn't a vice president role or anything like that. There tends to be somebody who sort of acts as if what we would call the sort of de facto PM. There is that rather grand-sounding title, the First Secretary of State. Somebody who is able to deputise in particular circumstances at Prime Minister's questions, for example. But you're right, it is a sort of quirk of British politics that there isn't this sort of official deputy position in the way that there is in other countries.